West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Tonight on the readout.
I'm not going to mince words with you all. Democrats want Republicans dead, and they've already started the killings.
Well, that kind of inflammatory rhetoric is what we've come to expect from the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But what's really disturbing is the deafening silence when her colleagues are asked to denounce that kind of extremist talk. Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with the global resurgence of fascism. Yesterday, Brazil held the first round of its presidential election, and the self-described Trump of the tropics, Jair Bolsonaro, emerged in second place, just 5 points behind the frontrunner leftist former president Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. Because no candidate received 50% of the vote, Brazil's elections are headed to a runoff at the end of the month. According to the Associated Press, Lula da Silva had 48% of the vote and President Bolsonaro had 43%. Bolsonaro outperformed the polls. In the lead up to Sunday's first round, Bolsonaro, like the former American president, claimed that the election was rigged. Unsurprisingly, like Trump, Bolsonaro has openly praised dictators, paying homage to the 1964 political coup that resulted in roughly 20,000 people in his country being tortured. Bolsonaro, a former army captain, has used the military as a prop during his recent attacks against the Supreme Court and other institutions, openly flirting with the idea of a coup of his own. His language, much like Trump's, has increasingly divided the country. His base openly calls for blood in the streets. Bolsonaro has also promoted a return to religion, family values, and nationalism, a political philosophy parroted by the newly minted neo-fascist Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and by conservatives here in the U.S. In fact, Meloni's election was celebrated by U.S. Republicans. Texas Senator Ted Cruz called her rhetoric spectacular. And former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Italy deserves and needs strong conservative leadership. I mean, who cares, right? If that strong leadership involves demonizing minority communities and immigrants and threatening to revoke the free will of women. All good. Those same Republicans remained largely silent this weekend when their party leader, the twice impeached former president, launched into a racist social media rant, attacking Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's wife and seemingly summoning his supporters, once again, to violence. On Friday, using his much ridiculed social media app, the 2020 election loser posted that McConnell has a death wish, in all caps, for having supported legislation to keep the government operating through mid-December. He then went on to smear McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, his own former transportation secretary, by referring to her as his China-loving wife, Coco Chao. Naturally, the majority of the Republican Party didn't have much to say about any of that. Florida Senator Rick Scott, who is in charge of the Senate Republicans' re-election campaign arm, brushed it off as just another silly nickname.
You're a member of the Senate GOP leadership. Are you okay with this?
Well, look, I can never talk about, respond to why anybody else says what they said. As you know, the president likes to give people nicknames. You can ask him how he came up with the nickname. I'm sure he has a nickname for me. I don't condone violence, and I hope no one else condones violence.
Okay, well, it was left to the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal then to denounce what sure did sound like a death threat against the Senate minority leader, since no Republican would dare to do so. In fact, Republicans have spent so long being timid or indifferent to Trump's outright racism and dalliances with violence. Even McConnell didn't have the guts to defend himself or his own wife, shades of Ted Cruz. But the last time that they laughed off those threats and told us to take him seriously, but not literally, was when he summoned a mob to Washington and told them to fight like hell to overturn the 2020 election. Their indifference left at least 7 people dead and resulted in the first time in modern American history that supporters of a losing candidate, well, actually the first time, period, that they assaulted our nation's Capitol. The Republican Party's complete refusal to hold Trump accountable allowed Stuart Rhodes, leader of the white nationalist right-wing paramilitary group, the Oath Keepers, to answer Trump's call to violence. And unlike Trump, Rhodes and 4 co-defendants are being forced to answer for their actions. Earlier today, jurors heard the opening remarks in a seditious conspiracy case against the members of the Oath Keepers, who, according to the Department of Justice, concocted a plan for armed rebellion and did whatever was necessary, up to and including using force, to stop the transfer of power from Donald Trump to President-elect Joe Biden. Rhodes' attorney said that he did nothing illegal and called the case against him completely wrong. Trump seemed to agree. He has said that he would look very favorably at full pardons for January 6th defendants if he becomes president again. And I'm joined now by Michael Steele, former Republican National Committee chairman and host of the Michael Steele podcast, and Thomas Zimmer, visiting professor at Georgetown University and contributor to The Guardian US. And I'm going to start with you, Thomas. Thank you for being here. I told you before we came on, I will say it again on TV, that your Twitter feed is sort of a lifeline for me so that I know I'm not crazy when I talk about the fact that, and I've been talking about this for quite a few years, that fascism is coming back, right? That it's here in America and that it's real. I just laid through and went through a whole series of things, from Trump threatening violence against the sitting minority leader in the Senate, attacking his wife racially, to what's happening in Italy. Is there a difference in your view to the kind of fascism that's coming here and the kind of fascism we're seeing in places like Brazil and in Italy?
Well, look, fascism is a difficult term, right? It was even difficult to define back when it arose in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, because in many ways, fascist movements were all over the place. They were more defined by what they hated than by anything else. They were violently anti-socialist, anti-liberal, anti-democratic, anti-pluralist. I think, to me, what is very important is that there is a tendency in this country, in America, to look at all of this, the history of fascism, the sort of rise of fascistic movements, parties, all over the quote-unquote West and beyond the West. You talked about Brazil, and see that as something that has no sort of equivalent in U.S. history, has no roots in U.S. history. But there is a domestic tradition, a domestic U.S. tradition of, well, if you want to call them fascist movements or ideas, or if you want to call them far-right, violent, white supremacist, maybe the terminology doesn't even matter all that much. Right. What is important is that in this country, right, there's always been a significant faction that has just not been on board with the idea of America becoming a multiracial, pluralistic democracy. And that has always been willing to embrace violence, right, to prevent the country from ever becoming that. And there's a strong domestic tradition of this. And I think we need to grapple with that, because what we're seeing right now is not new. It's not an aberration. It is in tradition and sort of in line with these long-standing tendencies and impulses against democracy.
And against, and you, I think you made a really important point, against multiracial democracy. That's the challenge. And Michael Steele, you had to deal with that challenge as the head of the Republican Party for a time, which is this sort of tension between, you know, are we a white country with some non-white people in it, in which they get to be here, but they shouldn't be wielding power, right? Or are we a true multiracial democracy where the black president coming up doesn't cause a complete conflagration, doesn't upend the whole culture, right? Where people aren't pitting themselves into tribes to fight for power. The latter seems to be where the Republican Party has decided they are. No one is condemning the former president, who still, they talk about like he is still the president, for attacking the sitting minority leader of the United States Senate. Even Mitch McConnell isn't attacking for that. And let me play one more person, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Because one of the things, Thomas Zimmer had a tweet thread today where he talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene and put her in the context that it's always they define their attacks on the other side by saying, no, we're the victims. We have to do whatever it takes because the other side is trying to hurt us. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
We're all targets now, though, for daring to push back against the regime. And it doesn't stop at a weaponized legal system. I'm not going to mince words with you all. Democrats want Republicans dead, and they've already started the killings.
They've already started the killings, Michael Steele. And so when you frame it that way, well, anything goes. Anything you have to do to stop these people that are doing the killings.
Yeah, that's the point. You grease the skids as much as you can. You create as little resistance by taking the most extreme posture rhetorically. And in the past, when it was the John Birch Society, when it was, what we saw with John McCain during the presidential race, the attacks on Barack Obama, the leadership of the party said no. They stood up against that. They responded to it, right? They didn't hemada or go silent. They leaned into to reestablish and reaffirm the very self-same democratic principles that have defined the country, and more specifically, those things that we allegedly believed as Republicans about individual rights and liberties and freedoms, right? Now that's all thrown out. And I think Thomas puts his finger on a very important point, that this thread has always been a part of the American fabric. It has been woven in various ways, and at various times has been pulled on. What we see now is, instead of one group here or an individual idiot like Marjorie Taylor Greene pulling on it and being rebuffed, now you find an entire political construct is pulling on that thread and is trying to reweave this idea of democracy and pluralism. Yeah, a lot of white folks don't like the idea that you and me, Joy, represent an existential threat to their existence, right, in their view. But the reality of it is, we've been here for 400 some years, and we've managed to work through a lot of that. Now you see this retrenchment and this regression away from this idea that Rodney King moment can be a real thing. Can we all just get along? And instead, they want to refute that. So they put it in political context. Instead of saying, white people are being threatened by black people, or black people and Asians or minorities want to see white people dead, it's Democrats want to see Republicans dead. Republicanism representing this uber whiteness that they're projecting around the globe, and certainly here in the country.
It is Tuesday, the 4th of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Did you know a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world? It always has, and it always will. Though I have to confess, and many of you already know this, but it bears repeating, is that the way Hungary is going, maybe we ought to go for the Spanish paprika, because it is equally as good. It's just that in generations past, there was a lot less Spanish paprika, which then drove the price up. The old laws of supply and demand. Well, now Spain has greatly increased their output of paprika. And so we might take a look and maybe slide our investments over there. I just hope that paprika doesn't turn into saffron. Did you know that they used to use saffron to paint stained glass for the cathedrals back in, the 1100s or whenever? Can you believe that? Saffron, it's not the easiest of plants to pick. To get the saffron part, you got to use little needle chopsticks. Yeah, it's not easy. I'm just saying. Get those little fronds out there. I've made saffron rice, and you only take a few threads. That's all you need. And that's all you can afford, probably, too. That's how it usually works. Well, how are you on this Tuesday? The Supreme Court is well on its way, and, well, I guess they don't even need to decide on the enabling acts. They've just conferred it upon themselves because they are, after all, you know, our betters, and we should submit. I will admit that there are 3 on the court that we shouldn't color in the same broad brush as the maggot court. But it is. It's the maggot court. And our 3 people? Is that how we look at it? Ours? Meaning the side of law, order, reason, precedent, constitutional authority. Yeah, we're at the minority now, and it is the Opus Dei freaks taking over. All right. No wonder they like the dark money, because their spouses are so involved in all the investments that backs them up. This is the Manchurian Candidate. Everybody's spouse is Angela Lansbury. My God. I'm not talking about the sexy dishpot Angela Lansbury from back in World War II. I'm talking about, the scheming lady. Boy, Angela could play that pretty good. Yeah, everybody thinks, oh, yeah, well, it's like Murder, She Wrote. Well, no, Angela Lansbury had some other acting chops, too, and she could be downright evil. I'm just saying. Great actress. But anyway, everybody's spouse is Angela Lansbury in the Manchurian Candidate. Go look it up. You'll see what I mean. Oh, my. So, Trump is suing CNN for defamation for calling him, I don't know, well, for the big lie, because apparently that's defaming. Because this guy has been documented lying how many? Tens of thousands of times, right? And that's only when they started documenting it. Not talking about the time he was calling up the Sun and the Post posing as John Barron to dish dirt on everything and then give Donald Trump some sort of cred. Yeah, give me a break. Everybody was in on that back in the day. I mean, geez. Shock rock jocks. Shock jock. Yeah, shock jocks. There we go. We're divulging it all the time. Everybody in New York knew it. That's why we tried to warn you. I mean, even just friends of New York knew it. Because when you go to New York, you can't escape certain things. And one of those was mocking Donald Trump. Jeez. Like he was supposed to be the personification of all the playboys in the world. There were some really nice playboys until Donald Trump came around and gave him a dirty name. Okay? I'm just, saying. Not that playboys have any great mark in the development of our society. I'm just saying that there were some that had some noblesse oblige. Okay. Anyway, we have evolved now, haven't we? I'm sure we have. Now, Herschel Walker having this scandal being divulged now about his paying for an abortion. I don't, some people think that's going to sink him. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of Baptist ministers out there who I'm sure paid for an abortion when they got their congregant pregnant. That's one way to hush it up. Oh, well, she's on a prayer meeting out of state right now. Oh, really? Okay. And so it may resonate with a certain electorate of like, oh, geez, everybody does that. How else are you going to save your career? Okay. Which I still exposes the rank hypocrisy, but they don't care. They don't care if they're caught in rank hypocrisy. They look at it as like another way of giving them more power in the digital game world. Oh, yeah, I'll get that, like, rank hypocrisy bubble. Oh, gives me more power. Oh, yeah, double down on the lie. Gives me more power. Sue somebody for calling what you're doing the big lie when you're doing the big lie. I know it has Nazi connotations. That's the whole point. Now he's like, he being Trump, is all angry because CNN ostensibly compared him to Trump. Well, they're not the only ones. Okay? Trump and Jungen and all the rest of his psychophants that, I don't know, give him the stiff arm salute and the one finger pointing to heaven. Hi there, you're the one. Okay, well, we could go on and on and on, and you know how that goes. So why don't we collect ourselves? And when I say ourselves, I mean the royal ourselves, because I mean me. But I'm being polite here. Anyway, because there's lots more of me where I come from, if you know that Fire Sign Theater allusion. Anyway, why don't we collect ourselves and look at what we have curated for you for the rest of the show? Well, of course, at the top, yes, disturbing, hateful rhetoric and a sign of a resurgence of fascism is being condoned on the right. I would say not necessarily condoned, but encouraged. Yes, encouraged. On the rest of the menu, I had to include a little bit of salaciousness here because when I was playing music with Cottonmouth, and just so you know, I was a roadie and sometime backup singer. But, I took notes. So anyway, Yuba City, for this next story where this high school football team had to forfeit the rest of the season after players staged a slave auction with 3 black students in their underwear. That's the salacious part. But when I played or traveled with Cottonmouth back in the day, Yuba City was my experience, and the reputation was that little town was full of Nazi fascists. Even back then, I'm just saying. So it wasn't shocking when I found out, they had the players themselves conducted a mock slave auction with 3 students that they stripped down in their underwear and put them up against a wall and threw money at them. Okay. I'm just saying, that doesn't sound shocking, knowing the reputation of Yuba City. All right. I not only just traveled with Cottonmouth, they also put me up on stage and let me sing like a few solos in a set. So there was that. And that's how you get addicted to applause, because once it happens, you want to have it happen again. Okay, I confess. An Arizona clinic has a workaround for the state's abortion pill ban. And Georgia prosecutor Fani Willis seeking search warrants in the Trump election fraud case is a sure sign that the wide-ranging probe has entered a new phase. I like that. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where North Korea fired a ballistic missile over Japan, causing officials to issue a rare evacuation order for the northern region prefectures, which includes Hokkaido, I should tell you. And the Russian journalist who made international headlines after protesting the war in Ukraine live on state television has escaped house arrest and fled with her 11-year-old daughter. Get out of there, gal. Get out. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, and hopefully she's surviving the remnants of all these hurricanes and tropical storms. So thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would help. So send us what you can, and if that could be in the form of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, and thus becoming a Patreon of Netroots Radio, it helps us pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue this powerhouse of resistance that is the little engine that could, because we've been doing this for 11 years. And there's been some obstacles thrown our way by trolls and bots. And you know what hostile foreign power that was funding them. I'm just saying. And we're still here. All right? We're still here. And we have you to thank for that. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you for your generosity in the future, because this is almost like Minority Report. Almost. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank him for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find those links by following my Twitter feed at Justice Putnam. Follow the show at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. You know the drill. Yes, you do. All right, this first offering here that I mentioned had a bit of salaciousness to it, because, I don't know, high school students, underwear, I don't know, hijinks. Is that what it is? Just high school hijinks? Yeah, Nazi high. Okay, who wrote this? Alexandra E. Petrie, a staff writer at the LA Times. A high school football team in Northern California was forced to forfeit the remainder of its season after a video showed several players staging a reenactment of a slave auction, according to district officials. Good for them. In a statement, Doreen Osumi, the superintendent of Yuba City Unified School District, called the incident at River Valley High School in Yuba City extremely distressing, and confirmed that participating students are not playing the rest of the season. The student athletes, that's a stretch, were in violation of the Code of Conduct, Osumi said. As a result, we do not have the necessary number of players to safely field the varsity team, and thus must forfeit the remainder of the season, Osumi said. The news of the video and its aftermath came ahead of River Valley's game against Roseville or Wood Creek High School last Friday. The Sacramento Bee reported that Osumi sent an email to district staff members, including those at River Valley, announcing the team's forfeiture and saying the school district had launched an investigation into a disgraceful video made by River Valley players. I received a copy of a recording of the River Valley High School football team members acting out a reprehensible act of a slave auction, Osumi wrote in the email. The recording clearly demonstrates that this situation was orchestrated and organized, which underscores my concern that students spent time contemplating this terrible act without the slightest regard that this action is hateful and hurtful. Oh, I can hear the maggot right-wingers whining right now, can't you? Now, KCRA-TV in Sacramento reported that it had obtained a copy of the video in which about a dozen students pointed and yelled dollar amounts at three black students who were standing in their underwear up against a wall. The video has since been deleted. I'm sure they have. In her statement, Osumi said, though students may have thought the skit was funny, it was unacceptable and required reflection on systemic racism. Reenacting a slave sale as a prank tells us that we have a great deal of work to do with our students so they can distinguish between intent and impact, Osumi said. We know that corrective action may be required in accordance with policy, but it is education, honest, open discussions, and instruction that will guide our students to realize that their choices and actions have consequences. And as I mentioned before, I can just hear the maggot fascists whining at this very moment. Bob Christie of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A Phoenix abortion clinic has come up with a way for patients who can end their pregnancy using a pill to get the medication quickly without running afoul of a resurrected Arizona law that bans most abortions. Under the arrangement that began yesterday, Monday, patients will have an ultrasound in Arizona, get a prescription through a telehealth appointment with a California doctor, and then have it mailed to a post office in a California border town for pickup, all for free. While not as easy as before, an Arizona judge ruled that a pre-statehood law criminalizing nearly all abortions could be enforced nearly 2 weeks ago. The process saves an overnight trip to a major California city with an abortion clinic, and it is more accessible than the previous workaround used by Camelback Family Planning in Phoenix, which was to have a doctor in Sweden prescribe the pills and a pharmacy in India mail them to Arizona. That could take up to 3 weeks. Ashley Fearling, a nurse at the clinic, said the cost of the pills will be covered by the Abortion Fund of Arizona, which is helping women pay for out-of-state access to abortions. Women can use a pill for an abortion until the 12th week of pregnancy. Pills and surgical abortions were legal until about 24 weeks, until the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade in June and allowed states to ban all abortions. Kate Brumback of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Georgia prosecutor investigating whether Trump and his allies broke the law trying to overturn his 2020 election loss in the state is seeking search warrants in the case, a sign that the wide-ranging probe has entered a new phase. The revelation came yesterday, Monday, in a court order filed by Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney, who's overseeing the special grand jury seated to help the investigation. in an order sealing any search warrants and related documents from being made public. McBurney wrote that District Attorney Fani Willis's office is, quote, now seeking to obtain and execute a series of search warrants, the affidavits for which are predicated on sensitive information acquired during the investigation, end quote. Disclosure of the information could compromise the investigation, McBurney wrote, by, among other things, causing flight from prosecution, destruction of or tampering with evidence, and intimidation of potential witnesses. It could also result in risks to the safety and well-being of people involved in the investigation, he wrote. It was not immediately clear who the targets of the search warrants are, or to whether any search warrants had yet to be approved by a judge. To obtain a search warrant, prosecutors must convince a judge they have probable cause that a crime occurred at the location where authorities want a search. As Willis's investigation ramps up, the public court filings in the case have provided a rare window into the workings of a special grand jury that meets behind closed doors. Willis opened the investigation early last year, shortly after the release of a recording of a January 2nd, 2021 phone call in which Trump suggested that Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger could find the votes needed to overturn his loss to Democrat Joe Biden. In addition to the Trump-Raffensperger call, Willis confirmed early on that she was investigating a call that Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina made to Raffensperger, and the sudden departure of the U.S. Attorney in Atlanta in early January 2021, and statements made during legislative committee hearings by people pushing debunked claims, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the state's elections. Okay, well, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
This is Scientific American's 60-second science. I'm Camilo Garzón. In July, the White House released the first image of the collection of pictures from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, during a preview event with President Joe Biden.
6.5 months ago, a rocket launched from Earth, carrying the world's newest, most powerful deep space telescope on a journey 1 million miles into the cosmos. It's a new window into the history of our universe. And today we're going to get a glimpse of the first light to shine through that window.
It was a high-resolution image of a cluster of distant galaxies known as SMACS 0723. It was the deepest, sharpest infrared image of the universe, ever. The image had to be seen to be believed, and on that day, it was everywhere to see and ponder, from the big screen in Times Square to trillions of small screens around the world. But what if you are physically unable to see it?
SMACS 0723. The background of space is black. Thousands of galaxies appear all across the view. Their shapes and colors vary. Some are various shades of orange, others are white. Most stars appear blue and are sometimes as large as more distant galaxies that appear next to them. A very bright star is just above and left of center. It has 8 bright blue long diffraction spikes.
Descriptive, scientific. And if you were unable to see, you would, for the first time, be able to construct a mental image of what the rest of the seeing world saw.
When I think about people listening to the alt text that we write, I want it to be like listening to a book, where you imagine the scene, all the characters in the scene, and in these cases it might be galaxies and stars as the characters, all the activity in it.
That's Claire Blum, principal science writer at the Space Telescope Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, the operations center for the Webb telescope. And alt text, as you might have gathered, is an official way to describe and make accessible the contents of an image to someone that might not be able to see it with their own eyes. In 2020, it was estimated that over 1 billion people on Earth live with vision impairment. That's according to the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness. So, if many millions around the world were following the news of Webb's first image, the number of viewers who actually couldn't view it was likely significant. That image's alt text has likely been heard by multitudes. But alt text can go further than just a visual description. It can even add context to an infographic or a graph that might not be clear to all that take it in, whether by looking at it or listening to it described. At its best, alt text also helps
kind of fill in the gaps for what you might be missing if you can't access the whole image completely.
Margaret Carruthers, also of the Space Telescope Science Institute.
Everyone's perception is different. Details of the science might be evident to an astronomer or a scientist, but it is not going to be immediately evident to a member of the public who does not have that educational background.
That's Claire Blum again.
So that's why it's so important that we had a team of educators and scientists going through and just double-checking us. Did we cover everything, but also did we attempt to describe some of the science?
Both Blum and Carruthers say that alt text represents a merging of science and art. But it's also critical work, because no one should be left out of the experience of taking in our universe in a new way.
For me, it's a bit of awe first, but then, okay, that's the hook. Now you're into this, let me tell you what's here. So then being able to describe, for example, the star at the center of a planetary nebula, and then describing the scene of gas and dust around it, being able to compare it to, wispy or translucent fabrics. Even if somebody hasn't seen fabric blowing in the wind, they perhaps have felt it and understand the differences in the weights of fabrics. But either way, the goal is to paint a picture with the writing to be complete, to provide the whole as much as possible. It's not a one-to-one, but it's providing somebody that same in-depth experience, that opportunity.
A kind of adaptation and translation that still communicates and paints a picture as well as it can. Carruthers agrees.
So in that way, it is very much like a translation where somebody translating poetry might focus on, one word over another to kind of convey the feeling or the intent of the poetry.
For the Webb's first images, they wrote descriptions that were both scientifically accurate, illuminating, and I might even say poetic. Here's Blum reading one of her favorites.
This frame is split down the middle. Webb's mid-infrared image is shown at left, and Webb's near-infrared image on the right. The mid-infrared image appears much darker, with many fewer points of light. Stars have very short diffraction spikes. Galaxies and stars also appear in a range of colors, including blue, green, yellow, and red. The near-infrared image appears busier, with many more points of light. Thousands of galaxies and stars appear all across this view. They are sharper and more distinct than what is seen in the mid-infrared view. Some galaxies are shades of orange, while others are white. Most stars appear blue with long diffraction spikes, forming an 8-pointed star shape. There are also many thin, long orange arcs that curve around the center of the image.
Beautiful. Here's Carruthers reading one of hers.
The background is deep blue with scattered points of light of different size and brightness. Running from left to right through the middle is a jagged line representing a light spectrum, a graph of brightness versus wavelength of light. The area below the spectrum has a rainbow pattern from red on the left to purple on the right. The coloring is semi-transparent, The blue starry background is visible behind and fades out toward the bottom. In the middle, superimposed on the starry background and part of the spectrum, is a large hexagon outlined in gold with two hexagonal outlines behind it. Within the hexagon is an illustration of space with shapes representing objects and materials at different distances and points in time that Webb is investigating. A large planet with hints of cloud formation, beams of matter jetting out from the center of a galaxy, galaxies of different shapes and sizes, nebulous cloudy wisps, and stars with 8 pointed diffraction patterns.
Thanks to the team from the Space Telescope Science Institute for describing these jaw-droppingly beautiful images in such a powerful and scientifically accurate way. For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Camilo Garzón.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Last year's gubernatorial race in Virginia was narrowly won by Republican Glenn Youngkin. An elite Wall Street multimillionaire, he was going to lose until he discovered a right-wing racist bugaboo called critical race theory. Glenn suddenly turned into an anti-CRT attack dog, fomenting parental fear and promising to sweep all teaching of the theory out of Virginia's classrooms. But golly, CRT was not actually being taught in any of the state's public schools. To help Youngkin dodge this inconvenient fact, a partisan front group called Metric Media created 25 fake news sites in Virginia that ran nearly 5,000 articles during the election, spreading the CRT bugaboo. While these papers have no subscribers and no significant readership, they allowed demagogues like Youngkin to use such lies in speeches, ads, etc., laundering them as facts by simply saying, as reported in the such-and-such newspaper. With success in Virginia, Metric Media and other fake sites are pumping out CRT sludge in Florida, Texas, and other states with gubernatorial races this year. Indeed, the lie has become its own political industry, with such billionaire extremists as the Koch brothers pumping money into it. This is why America must have actual local newspapers, widely available and affordable either in print or online, that have the community commitment and journalistic resources to do the job of nurturing truth and democracy. Otherwise, we're ceding news to the shams and scams that are inevitable under hedge fund profiteers and networks of partisan hacks that already dominate wide swaths of America's media landscape. This is Jim Hightower saying, journalism is key to democratic self-government, and we should start investing in it, providing public funding for local independent watchdog reporting.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day that President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9639. It ordered the U.S. Navy to seize control of more than 40 oil refineries across the country. As World War II was drawing to a close, workers in many industries were growing increasingly restless. They had seen company owners rake in record profits, and the workers felt they had not received their fair share. This included oil refinery workers. In August, the workers rejected a proposed settlement of their grievances over wages and hours. On September 17th, the CIO Oil Workers Union called for a strike of its 35,000 members. Although the war was ending, Truman knew oil was needed to demobilize and redeploy the troops. He used that as a basis to thwart the workers and the strike. His executive order declared that the war effort will be unduly impeded or delayed by such interruptions. He went on to state, the Secretary of the Navy is hereby authorized and directed to take possession of the plants and facilities used in the transportation, refining, and processing of petroleum and petroleum products. Telegrams were sent to the refineries declaring that they were now under the control of the U.S. government. A third of the oil refineries in the nation came under this order. This included refineries owned by the giants of the industry, including Gulf, Shell, and Standard Oil. This was not the last time Truman attempted this tactic. He tried similar methods to intervene in labor disputes on the railroads and in the steel mills. Truman was certainly not alone. For more than a century, U.S. presidents have intervened to end strikes. From Grover Cleveland's calling out the Army to end the Pullman strike in 1884 to Reagan locking out the Patco workers in 1981. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only 88. Oh yes, partly cloudy skies throughout the day. Winds will be light and variable. Mainly clear skies tonight with lows in the mid to low 50s, winds light and variable, and then abundant sunshine tomorrow. Highs about 88, winds light and variable. Oh, a respite from all that heat. Ragweed pollen remains high as the pollen of record here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 39 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 4. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.07 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 62 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 67 and partly cloudy. Rome is 75 and fair. Kyiv is 48 with light rain. Kabul is 61 and clear. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 77 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 62 with showers in the vicinity. San Francisco, California is 57 and cloudy. And New York is 52 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Michelle Yet-Heat Lee of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. North Korea launched a intermediate-range ballistic missile over Japan, Japanese and South Korean officials said today, Tuesday. The missile, which was the first North Korean projectile to pass through Japanese airspace since 2017, landed in the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese government issued a rare evacuation order this morning, urging residents in the Aomori and Hokkaido prefectures in the northern region to take shelter. Japanese officials said the missile flew outside the country's exclusive economic zone, but they warned of falling debris. North Korea has tested an unprecedented number of missiles this year as it diversifies and expands its weapons arsenal, part of leader Kim Jong-un's 5-year plan. North Korea has conducted 5 rounds of ballistic tests since September 24th, ahead of Vice President Harris's visit to the region last week. In recent weeks, the U.S., Japanese, and South Korean governments have all conducted military exercises designed to demonstrate the allies' readiness to work together in the event of a conflict. The latest launch came as the U.S. and South Korea wrap up their joint military exercises involving the USS Ronald Reagan, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. U.S. and South Korean militaries today conducted a precision bombing training against targets in the sea drills in response to the North Korean missile, which I suppose is saber-rattling in their general direction.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Robin Dixon, Miriam Berger, and Natalia Abakamova of the Washington Post brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Russian journalist Marina Ovzhikhanova, who made international headlines after protesting the war in Ukraine live on state television in March, has escaped house arrest and fled with her 11-year-old daughter, according to Russia's Interior Ministry. Ovzhikanova's whereabouts are not known, nor is it clear exactly how she escaped her pretrial house arrest. The Interior Ministry put the 44-year-old on its wanted list. A former senior editor at Channel One, the Russian state-controlled television channel, she staged an astonishing protest live on air in March. She shouted, "No war," and held up a placard condemning the invasion of Ukraine and telling people not to believe government lies. She has since been fined twice for the offense of discrediting Russia's military and was placed under a 2-month house arrest in August on charges of spreading fake news about the military, which carries a sentence of up to 10 years. The latter related to a protest in July when she stood on the river embankment opposite the Kremlin in central Moscow and held up a poster calling the Russian president and his soldiers fascists. Her ex-husband first reported her absence to authorities on Saturday. Igor Ovzhikhanov, in an interview with the pro-Kremlin RT network, said he did not know where his ex-wife was, but that his daughter did not have a passport. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.